Okay, cool. So give you a quick background with me. So I am originally from Central Illinois, from Peoria, and then I went to law school in Chicago, and then I was like, this is terrible. I don't want to do this. I always wanted to work in entertainment. Moved out to Los Angeles exactly 2 weeks after I graduated law school. And that was 20 years ago, this past May. And I started working in the entertainment industry. So I worked at Gersh in the mailroom, and then as a talent agent assistant, which I also did not enjoy. I was like, I just want an agent. I don't want to be one. Um, and then I stopped doing that. I went back to law and did some other stuff for a while. And then 11-ish years ago, I started writing. And I did some like internships at production companies, and um, I mean, I can't remember everything, but all these like little jobs that you cobble together and things like that. And then I wrote a lot of like shorts, and I joined a like writers co-working space that is no longer, but it was called the Hatchery in Larchmont. Um, and I met a bunch of people through that, and they were starting a screenwriters specifically critique group, and so I joined that, and I learned so much just about writing from like professional writers and the curve of writing from non-professional writers. And then um, we kind of operated like a writer's room, and so it was interesting to learn those dynamics and things like that, and just to have your work go up and have people read it and critique it in front of you is like a real strange experience. But like it's terrifying. But then I literally had to call one of my best friends. I was like, tell me to walk into this place to like have people tell me how terrible my work is. But once you get desensitized from it, you get really excited because you're like, tell me what you didn't understand, tell me what like bumped you, that kind of thing. And it is really helpful. So during the time I was in that group for like 6-ish years or something. I got my first professional writing job, which was a movie originally titled Pride and Prejudice Cut, is now titled Becoming Ms. Bennet, semicolon, Pride and Prejudice, which some of you have seen. It's streaming on Peacock right now if you'd like to watch it. And that's my one and only like rom-com, because I'm not a romance type of person, even though I've been in a relationship for almost 20 years. And very happily married, but I'm not like a romance person. My husband will tell you I'm not the romantic one in this relationship. He is. So I wanted the dark stuff. So I went and I wrote some thrillers for hire for a producer who worked with Mar Vista as like a co-production to make it's not micro, ultra low budget thrillers on spec to then get distributed on a Lifetime. So I read a bunch of them. I read some Christmas movies for them that never got made, blah 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 blah. So I ended up 4 of them thrillers that I had written got made and distributed and aired, and those are all on my IMDb, so you can see that. If you want to, they're probably all on YouTube. I know a lot of them ended up there.
I happen to have one of them on my computer, and I accidentally
Do
the other day, and I'm like, wait, I think this is one of Erin's movies.
oh,
And I was like, what? No, it was, well, I'll have to find it and I'll let you know.
okay.
Oh, A Mother's Worst Fear.
Oh yes, that's like the first thriller I wrote. That has Joey Lawrence in it. So my 13-year-old self, who is obsessed with Blossom, is very excited about Joey Lawrence being in it. So that was actually the movie I wrote that I really learned about structure. So through all of this, I'm not a trained screenwriter. I trained as a lawyer, obviously, but don't do that. So I learned a lot through like reading scripts on Weekend Read when I worked at Gersh, reading scripts on Weekend Read when I worked at the production company, all of these things. And then like the ultimate teacher of writing is yourself. So you have to, in order to learn it, you just have to do it. And structure is something, it's the last piece of writing that I was missing for like a long, long time. And then I finally just made myself learn it. And then now it makes so much sense to me, but it took like my third movie. I was like, oh, I get this now. So it's like it's very hard, and you just have to do it, and you have to go through the pain of doing it. There's no way around it, though. You just go through it. So and I know quite a few of you on the call also write, and so like you know what I'm talking about. And sometimes you have to like write the wrong thing or make the mistake, and I do that constantly. I'm still doing that. I was excited for the talk tonight because I have 2 features I'm working on that I'm like, and this will help me like really zone in on it. So that's my backstory. And then I just put together some thoughts today. I emailed it. There's 2 documents about like how I do things and then how I know some other people do things. And we can just go through it. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Oh, please.
Um,
Do I need to give you permission or is it okay?
uh, share screen. Let's see if my job lets me do it because I'm on their thing.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So probably most people have heard of the 3-act structure. And that is sort of the most popular way to write. When you get further down in this document, you'll see that there are other methods of writing. And what I have to say about that is do what works best for you. And also, if you're writing your own thing, it's your thing, do what you want. If you're hired to write, you have to figure out like, okay, what's the product that the deliverable I'm supposed to give them, like the Lifetime thrillers have a 9-act structure, whatever. So but this is just sort of like the generally accepted structure. And when Stephen was talking about like the 2nd-act break, those things, those are always, if you're talking about the structure in the industry with anybody, everyone's going to assume you're talking about the 3-act structure. So a long time ago, when I was trying to like write a first draft of something in 3 weeks, because that was the turnaround I had to like really boil it down and say, all right, what are like the pivotal things that I need to know before I start writing so I don't meander and I structure everything properly. So I came up with these like 7 scenes that I had to know that fit into the structure so that I could then like hit the ground running. So I wrote them here. So like your opening scene is when you meet your characters in the world that they're in, and it's their current normal. And then scene number 2, probably a lot of you have heard this, is the inciting incident. So it depends on the length of your script, but it should happen no later in a standard script by page 12, because we want to see it pretty early, because we don't want to like stay too long in the normal world. We want to get the ball rolling. And that is the one thing that happens that sets everything else in motion. So like I'm writing a script right now. It's called The Jig Shoes. It's about a woman who gets obsessed with Irish dancing. And it's set in the 90s. And the inciting incident for her is sitting down to dinner and eating like her TV, like lean cuisine ravioli with like her overbearing mother, and them seeing Riverdance on PBS for the first time. And it just clicks something in this woman and awakens something that she had no idea about. And then she goes off on this like crazy, I need to learn Irish dancing. So that's like, if that hadn't happened, if she hadn't turned on the television and seen Riverdance, the rest of the things in the story would never have happened. So that's what you call an inciting incident. So the end of Act 1, and Act 1 is like the first quarter of the movie. The end of Act 1 is where your character decides they want something, they're pursuing a goal, they're gonna go after somebody, they're gonna go after something. There's the chase starts, right? And then at that moment, your Act 2 starts. So Act 2 is the middle half of your script, which is very annoying. I wish it was broken up into clean quarters, what we tend to call like what's between number 3 and number 4 here on my list as Act 2A. So 2A is when the character starts chasing a goal. And that is when they call like the fun and games start to happen. They pursue, they get a little bit further, they reach an obstacle, they move back. So it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back sort of thing. And then they work up to the midpoint, which is number 4 on my list, which is the like cross the Rubicon part. They take charge of the situation and they start to drive the story. So we're still in Act 2, but it's the midpoint. It's just past 50% of your, it's like at 55% of your film. And that is like where you start Act 2B. So then they're driving the story, but they're coming up with like a lot more obstacles and they keep trying different things and nothing seems to work. And then they bottom out at number 5 on my list, which is the end of Act 2, which is called like the dark night of the soul, or when things seem at their worst and they're never going to reach their goal. And here in like their story, there's usually some kind of sacrifice that they make for like a very emotional character driven story. It's usually their ego that they're like they need to check their ego and like operate differently, but that's the Act 2 break. And then once they get through the dark night of the soul, they've made the sacrifice, they've given something up, they get to the climax of the story, which is where everything comes together and they either get the thing or they don't get the thing. But regardless of that, in 95% of stories, which are comedies, as we know them, even if they're a drama, they're comedies. Even if they don't get the thing, they change at this point, the climax of the story. If they refuse to change, then it's a tragedy. And everybody knows when they watch it because it's like so depressing and nothing changes and there's no happy ending. And then we have like it's called a denouement, but it feels like an epilogue a lot of the time. That's like the new normal. And so they begin their journey as like they've learned the lesson, they've accomplished their goal, or they haven't, but something's happened in their life to set them on a better path. And that's where the story ends and we go on our merry way. So those are the 7 scenes I try to figure out before I start. Sometimes that's impossible, and sometimes you just have to start, and then it has to get messy, and then you go but I always go back to this, and I, particularly during like rewriting, I try to make sure I'm hitting these scenes in the place that they're supposed to be. If I'm writing like a conventional film. So if you scroll down a little bit, I try to capture like the diagrams that explain the 3-act structure. Again, there's like a million ways to think about this and to do this, and everybody has their own theory, and you don't have to listen to any of them if you don't want to. But like seeing this diagram, like people reference this a lot. Like, I mean, I'll literally like draw it out and sometimes and like understand, okay, where am I in that thing? Oh, so I just grabbed 2 ones that were different enough to show you that like there's different ways to think about them. And if you scroll down, there's like a 4-act structure, which is really a 3-act structure. They just call it 4. And then I included a little link to help like explain what that is. And this is a lot of film. Dramatic TV uses a 5-act structure, and I really love this no film school explanation of it if you're interested in exploring the structure in drama, 1-hour dramas. And then if you go to programmers like Christmas movies, thrillers, those kinds of things, they're in a 9-act structure. So I just like included a guideline I got like probably like 5 years ago when I was writing some thrillers and things like that. Yeah, and then there's so much material out there like that it's mind-boggling and you just have to do what works for you. But I included some of my favorite things. Cut to the Chase, UCLA Writers Program is an amazing book that explains um in each act in 1, 2A, 2B, and 3, like 10 things you have to follow to hit like these marks or the like the beats we want to see in each one. It's like a phenomenal book. I've used it so much. It kind of follows the hero's journey as well and like integrates it into the 3 act structure. So which I'm going to start thinking a lot more about that now that we've done that in our class, but that's a great one. And then there's this other book called The Screenwriter's Bible that I use a lot that like explains this stuff like so well. But I'm a very like bare bones person, and I am a cut to the chase type of person anyway. So those 2 books like really helped me, and they were not meandering for me. And then I just included like 4 other books that people talk about a lot in the industry. So Save the Cat, which probably a lot of you have heard, many of you may have read. There's a popular one that came out a few years ago called Coffee Break Screenwriter. People like that one a lot. Robert McKee's Story, which I think is the one they talked about in what was the Charlie Kaufman movie adaptation? I think he went to his like seminars or whatever. And then Sid Field's screenplay, which I tried to read, but it was like so long and I could not get into it. But I am like, oh, it's too much for me. Anyway, so that is my very short feel about like how I approach writing and how I approach structure. There are many other elements to screenwriting, especially when your screenplay is being analyzed. So there is tone, which is super important, character development, dialogue, plot, which is different than structure, which is really, really hard to distinguish. Uh, and then the 6th one, usually when your script is being evaluated for coverage by an agency, management, a production company, whatever, is marketability. So those are like the 6 elements that you tend to think about and create. Like if you're writing a super dark tragedy, like that's not going to end up on Hallmark, right? So there's like the elements differ depending on your target platform. So which is something I could think of to talk about for next time. But yeah.
Can you scroll down to the 2nd page? I think it was that chart right there.
Yep.
What do can you describe the plot point, pinch point, that kind of thing?
Okay, so the first plot point, the not my favorite like way to think about it is like but it's like because I tend to write where things are where the structure for me is the emotional journey. But there are other ways to write where when you think about structure, it's about the events that are happening. And so the first plot point is usually like a turn in the story where you kind of like veer off into like another world. And then a pinch point, to me, what they're saying is a pinch point is a really big obstacle that the character then has to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be very honest. Sometimes when people are talking about things that are happening in scripts, they'll talk about the plot. Oh, this plot point, the first plot point, or the second one, and I'll have like no idea. I'll be like, this makes no sense to me. I don't know what you're talking about. I had a very different interpretation of it when I was watching it or reading it, and it like I thought it was in a different part. But okay, that's where I'm like head nodding. But yeah, that's what I would call the first plot point here. I would call that like the first act break. So for me, that's like the character decides they're going to pursue something.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then they're like trying, running into obstacles, trying, take control, trying, huge, huge, huge obstacle. Maybe has a little change here, like changes a little bit, which catapults them forward. And they're like, oh, this is great. And sometimes I think you might call this like the false win,
Yeah.
or like, yeah,
I was
when
gonna
they
say,
think they've gotten the thing.
yeah, it's the moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark where they get the Ark and then it gets taken away from them immediately.
Yeah. It's maybe the point in the movie where like sometimes I'll be like, what time is it? Oh, it's not over yet. No, we're gonna have so much more
Yeah.
like trouble because it can't be over yet because this can't. It was too. It's like it was too easy. If your brain's going, oh, that was too easy, that means it's probably here.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, because I look at that and it's like a very overly simplified, because there's lots of pinch points and lots of uh you know, there's lots of
It
yeses and nos.
it is, and that's like the I'm yelling. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm yelling.
Yeah, we
But um, there's like this part is called like the fun and games. So it's not a linear line, even though it looks like it on the screen. It should be like a big squiggle line, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down.
what is the key event? What's the difference between that and the inciting event?
I don't know.
Okay. I would guess that the inciting incident is the call to action and the key event is probably the refusal. Because really the first plot
Yeah.
is accepting the call to adventure, isn't it?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you were talking today, I was like, oh, I want to map the hero's journey to all of this, but I
Yeah, it'd be
didn't
really
have time. Yeah. In
Erin, I
fact,
have a
this.
quick question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
When is this 4-act structure used? Because I'm familiar with 3-act structure and 5-act, but did you say what type of projects use 4-act?
So technically, that's a great question. Technically, this is pretty much the same as this. There has been a pushback in the 3-act structure a little bit because some people think that it really is 4 acts. So because this is 25% of your movie, this is 30% or 30% of your movie, this is 25% of your movie, and this is 20% of your movie. So this middle bit, which is 55% of the movie, has been argued to break it up into this instead. So, but if you notice, like, there's like things in here that are like more detailed, right? Like Stephen was pointing out. So I I know of this, some people using this, and so I just grabbed it, but I think it's like an alternate. When people are unhappy with 3-act, they go to this because they think it's more detailed. And there's been a new, I think Stephen, you were talking about this in our class. There's like Dan Harmon's like story circle. So like there aren't even lines in that process.
Well, what's useful about mapping out story circle comes from really from the hero's journey, mapping that out as a circle. And it's done in a circle because it's actually uh it can be restarted. And so it's useful for series writing, because every time the
uh,
character gets to the freedom to live, then you find them in their ordinary world again. It just starts over.
yeah,
So
that's the challenge of biopics is like they try to do the whole person's like whole life, but it's like these are like, you know, this could be like a one day in a person's life, and then they get to their new normal, and then like a new thing happens to them the next day, and they're like, oh God, sends them off on a new journey, you know, that kind of thing. So when you think about the best biopics are like the ones that just take like a snapshot of like a key thing that happened to them in their life, and they do this with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I like that idea for television because that is,
Well, and it also,
you're on the wheel constantly.
it's hard not to think about, for me, it's hard not to think about Harry Potter because it's not only one movie, it's 7 or 8. And actually, as you think about it, the entire thing follows the 3-act / hero's journey. The Dark Night of the Soul is, you know, really the end of the 6th movie and into the 7th. But there's always a Dark Night of the Soul in each one of the movies as well. And so that's a really interesting thing as an actor. I think being aware that you have like these micro structures that happen even to a certain degree, don't you think, Erin? This structure happens in every scene to a certain degree.
Yeah, so the way I started thinking about it was like fractals. Like if you're in a series, then the whole thing has to follow this structure. And then each season has to follow this structure, but like within the big structure. And then each episode has to follow the structure within those two. And then each scene has to within all of those things.
Which is
so if
ironic.
you get a real
Go ahead.
Okay. I was like, so if you get a feel of that, like try setback, try you try to turn it get more, you know, and then into like a like and feel the tension, then it becomes really helpful.
You know, I think this is for series. This is a newer way. This is a much more recent thing they do with series, because if anybody ever watches like old television, you know that in America they had essentially a mandate to never change anything for the characters from week to week.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you started having that, you know, that changed sort of in the middle 80s. And then really started changing with things like 24 and things that are essentially Saturday morning serials, but they're weekly episodes.
Yeah, I've heard from people who go in and pitch now for series, they say that the number one question that is asked is, what are your 5-season arcs? Because when you get to 5 seasons, they make tons of money, the studio. And then how does it end? And if you can't give them an answer, like
Right.
like JJ with Lost, like if he didn't, I don't know if he knew.
He did not.
Seem like it. It seemed like it. Okay. So I was at Gersh when that pilot had been made and had not aired yet. In fact, my now husband was the man at the agency that she had to go get the VHS from to watch, because somebody was like, there's a pilot. And so I went to AJ's desk and I was like, I heard this thing called Lost. And he's like, here you go, give it back to me tomorrow. I'm like, okay. But it was so cool when it came out, but then it like went off the rails. And I think that's one of the big reasons why is like they want an ending now. They want to know how your story ends. So which it's really hard to do, but like if you can figure that out. My sister is a writer director, and she writes backwards. She writes from the end backwards.
Oh, I mean,
but she's a little right smart pants.
You can stop the share if you're not using the document, so we can see each other. But is that the first? So that's the first document that you shared, right?
Yeah. So the So the second one, let me open it just to make sure I'm not lying. So this is a document that I had gotten, oh gosh, a number of years ago, probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And at the time it was, I think, Hallmark. It's what it says on the title. But just their guidelines about some rules that they have, which is interesting because like so every distributor studio will have the rules of what goes on their platform because they're all targeting a very specific audience for different reasons. And so it's interesting with TV movies because they are the perfect mix of television and film because they're still aired on network television. They have, you know, standards and practices that they have to pass, which all Hallmark movies are going to pass, but they also have to fit within commercial structure. So you have to write a film that has the arcs that you can also put the commercial breaks where they belong without it cutting off weird. So yeah, this was just a guide that I got when I was supposed to write, and they write in 9x. So if you can see at the bottom of the first page, it literally gives you like a page count. So, and that's for the commercials.
That makes me really glad that I then just used one of Nikki DeLoach's scripts and copied it verbatim for how many pages I made every scene that I wrote. Because I didn't have this little document, so I just was like, "All right, this scene is 6 pages. This scene is."
It's interesting because last night I was sat down and I had told Philip after class that there's this scene I always thought he would be really great in, and I sent it to him. I was transcribing it because I couldn't find the script, and so it was Notes on a Scandal, right? And I was always searching for a comp for like this Irish dance movie that I'm writing that isn't Black Swan or Whiplash, because those two movies are too similar, and I needed something else. And Notes on a Scandal has a cluster B personality disordered person that I was writing about. So I was like, oh, this is the other comp. But I was like transcribing it. I was like, oh, I could just watch this movie and like write along with it at my plot points because it hit, you know, so you did the exact right thing. Like, it seems like these things are made up, but they're all just copies of each other. Mm-hmm. Like, the joke is like, give me the same thing but different. So truly what it is.
Anybody have any questions for Erin?
I got a question about the fun and games portion of scripts. So
yeah.
Sometimes when I'm writing, I don't know what to do in that portion of the script because it's like, I know the beginning, I know the end, I kind of know where the climaxes are, but getting to that point is sometimes a challenge. Can you kind of elaborate on what fun and games is supposed to encapsulate?
A lot of pain for the writer. This is my number one answer. I really hate 2A in that structure. Like, I loathe it. It's usually honestly the thing I write last. If I can get the beginning is so fun. Writing from like the midpoint to the climax because you're just like, I'm getting to the big thing that happened is so fun. And then writing the new normal is like, you know, a formula. If you've gotten that far, like it's like, oh, like this is naturally what would happen because I understand a human because I am one. So 2A is very, very hard. I would say write it last. And that I personally think that's the place where you fall into like tropes. Like I fall into them. I'm like, oh, I've seen this happen before, so I'm just gonna like no. So like as interesting as you can, and if you're entertained, that's something that people forget sometimes when they're writing. You should entertain yourself in that section the most because it's also where you lose people the most. I think.
It's also where you what?
Lose people the most.
Is in the
like I'll
say?
as in the audience. Like I'll if I don't like what's happening in 2A and what I'm watching, I'll just be like, boring, and like go on to the next thing.
You can make it all the way
Terrible.
through. You can make it all the way through Act 1, huh?
I mean, if it's okay, like I give it a chance, right? So this is another problem that people have in Act 1 is like they veer, right? So they want to tell this story, but they start over here instead. It's just like a very natural human instinct to do that. So the trick I use is like I write 10 pages and that's my movie starts on page 10, right? Because I'm a veerer. Because you got to land in the story. But yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
so you write
sometimes
10
I'll give
pages
it a chance.
before the movie starts.
Yeah.
And then you write another 10 to 12 pages before the inciting is in it.
Yeah. Because I need to know all that stuff about the people before. It's like doing your Warner Laughlin homework, right?
Yep.
But the audience doesn't.
Right. That's interesting because I actually started outlining a script for a client who I told I would write her something, and I always try to mean it when I say something, unlike everybody else in Hollywood. And I was like, I started with her birth, but we're not going to meet her till she's 50 years old, you know? And so in the outline, because I needed to know where she came from, because I'm like, I can't write her if I don't know who this person is and what her base human emotion is and what her background is, or I'm not going to write a very interesting story if she's not coming from somewhere. So I actually just included it in the story structure, you know?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Some people write like biographies. I remember like my first workshop with you to learn the technique. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to use this for writing because it is really helpful and you have to know those things.
That's why we've always had a writing teacher on staff. We don't currently, but we have in the past, because it's such a writerly technique, the Warner Laughlin technique.
Yeah.
Yeah. With so much stuff. So, as we gear this towards actors, we've been talking a lot about this in the Wednesday class, a little bit on Tuesday. So since Philip brought up the 2A,
Mhm.
one of the things that can happen is we can if we know where a scene is in the structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also know how much we can put on that scene, meaning what can we layer onto it because of where it is in the story, right? Ordinary world, you can't really layer anything onto it. It's what you see is what you get, right? Because it's the character's ordinary world. When we're in Fun and Games, Act 2A, the character has just received or accepted the call, right? But they have not yet taken control. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So do you have any insights into, as actors, what it means for us if we get an Act 2A scene for an audition? Meaning, how much can we put on that? What should we avoid putting on that, etc., if that makes any sense?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I would say if you get something that looks like a lot of things are happening to the person and the person not like driving it, it's probably in 2A. And I think a lot of people's natural tendency, even in writing in that section, is to kind of step backwards. And I don't know if this is a real term, but it's what I always use to explain it, is like blanding out. So yeah, things are happening to you, but that doesn't mean you don't have an opinion about what's happening. And it doesn't mean you don't try to like fix it or manipulate it or something like that. So I and a lot of writers do this. I do it all the time, and I really have to like get called out on it. And it's just like when the things are happening to the person, my character sometimes is a blank, and that is the most uninteresting thing in the world. So the more opinion about what's happening as it compares to what they want or what they're trying to do or other people in the story, I think is what makes it layered and interesting.
Okay, so you would actually argue putting more on it is better because it's already the pitfall is that you won't put anything on it because
Yeah.
it's sort of passive.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so you have to somehow layer it.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about those people, like Nicole Mashley said this about herself last week, and I hear a lot of people say that about themselves, is that they're very candid in their reactions, even if they're not the ones talking. And so I love that. It's so funny to me, or it's like so engaging. It's just like not clamping down on like, don't react, like all I want is reaction, I think, in that section.
So using the example of Raiders of the Lost Ark, what is the fun and games in that film?
I don't remember.
So
Even though I've seen it so many times.
Same, and
he gets the call to action from Marcus Brody, who has some guys for him to meet in the library or whatever, and they basically say, we think the Nazis are after this biblical artifact, the Ark. And then Harrison Ford talks about the history of the Ark. A lot of it's just made up garbage. And then he accepts the call, right? But I think the very first thing he does is go to Marion Ravenwood in Nepal. And so that's the beginning of the fun and games, right? He goes to Marion, he looks for the medallion that her father had. And of course she literally fun and games him. Like, first of all, the other guys come back and try to shoot him up and they get a big fight. And then she says, I don't have it. And then, she's like, I'm your partner. I'm going with you because you burned down my place. So he literally is in the middle of fun and games, right? It's like, and it hasn't gotten serious enough where he gets to that second act plot point or third act plot point that was in the document there. What was it called? The pinch point, the second pinch point. So I would argue that probably if I'm thinking about it, he accepts the call and he goes. And so that's when he first gets on the airplane. It's like, all right, I'll go and I'll see Marion. And then probably the first act pinch point is when she's in one of those baskets and she gets kidnapped and taken by Belloc. So that's that. So all of that literally is fun and games. I mean, he's literally playing the cup and ball, right, with her, which is hilarious when you think about it.
So while he's collecting his allies and meeting his enemies, that means that he is reacting to the situation because these things are unfolding around him. And then at the midpoint, he starts to take action into his own hands, uses his allies to battle his enemies.
I think so, essentially, because he goes and he rescues Marion, and I think that's the beginning of the middle. That's the midpoint, right? He goes and saves her, and then Sala and he try to get he tries to rescue her, and then he ties her back up, which is hilarious. Then Sala and he go get the Ark, and then Belloc comes, takes the Ark, and dumps Marion into the Well of Souls or whatever it is. I forget what that is, but and
Pit of Vipers or whatever.
Yeah. But as you're talking about that, one of the things we've been talking about in class is that, like, collecting allies and meeting enemies. And for actors, as we're working on our scripts and as we're working on our auditions, it's a good thing to have in mind, like, what is this? Am I collecting an ally, or am I meeting an enemy in this scene? Am I getting a tool that's a yes towards my goal, or am I being denied the tool, right? And usually, Erin, maybe you can answer this. I don't really know. I would just be speculating. When a character is denied a tool, that is never a final no, right? Because they have to have that tool, or they have to have something better. Meaning, if they get denied the tool, they have to then get something that replaces that or works better than that.
That's an interesting question, because I would argue, and this is just how I look at these things, it, like, somebody could look at it totally differently. The tool is always you. Do you know what I mean? And
Yes.
so sometimes that's the lesson that I would take. But so I don't write a lot of like action, and like those are like, a lot of those things are externalized, and so I don't have a lot of like reference for that, what like what that would be. But I would say that's part of the sort of theory that I always go with when writing these anything, is the first tool would be what that person wants, and then they have to learn what they need instead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, maybe if it's a physical thing, that's an externalized version of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. We talk about something like Raiders of the Lost Ark is a very clear treasure map. It's really just it's a treasure map, and that's, you've got to get the tools that you need to solve the treasure map, versus a drama, a human interaction
Oh yeah.
is always going to be somebody collecting the personal tools that they need to overcome the things that they, the great issue in their life.
Then I would say, if it's like the things that need to go on the treasure map, then it was like they were missing, like it would be like, oh, I think it's this tool, but it's really something else that goes there instead. But like, it's a false, anybody doing this treasure map would look for this, but because this person is special, they would see, oh no, that's not it. It's the circle that fits in the square, because you cut the things off to fit it in the square, whatever. So yeah.
That's sparking something in my mind, and hopefully this is informative to people. So I would almost argue that, as I'm thinking about it, every character has they have the mission, which is the treasure map item that they need to get, right? And they probably do need to be equipped with various things to do that. But ultimately, there's the overriding character arc, which for Indiana Jones is faith, because he does not believe in the power of the ark. He just believes it's an interesting gold box with some history. And at the end of the movie, as supernatural things start to happen, he suddenly realizes, no, this thing really has power, and tells Marion not to look at it. And, which is a reference back to Lot's wife in Sodom and Gomorrah turning into a pillar of salt when she looked backwards. So he recognizes, like, you can't look on this thing. And so his personal journey is not faith in that story. But the plot of the movie is go get the ark, have the ark, lose the ark, and finally the ark disappears up into heaven. The ark comes back down, or the lid goes up, comes back down, and the ark gets taken away and put in the big government vault, never to be seen again. So I guess maybe there's the personal journey of the character, maybe that's juxtaposed alongside the tools and the treasure map journey of the story, the plot of the story, maybe.
Yeah. I think there's like always those layers in it for sure. I'll give you an example. So my husband's name is AJ for those who don't know me, and we were watching Aladdin, like the original, a few days ago, and they got to his reprise where he's like, they'd find out there's so much more to me. I was like, discussed what there's so much more to him about, like he's tenacious and he's, all these things. And then AJ said, honey, they showed us when he gave the bread to the children in like the reprise of the song. I was like, oh damn, I missed that. So yeah, there's always the people who are leading with bravado. I think most of the time in like action movies it's like super common, right? And like most of the time it has to do with all the things you need to be successful are already inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to unlock them, and you have to have your whatever, like dark night of the soul, or like your come to Jesus moment, or whatever, where you are like, okay, well, I have to like drop my ego and the chip on my shoulder and admit that I need help from other people, or whatever it is, to be successful, because that's the only method of getting what you need to be successful in whatever goal you're pursuing. So yeah.
And it's a great thing to look at as actors, is like, what does my character need to learn about themselves before they can, achieve whatever it is that they're trying to achieve, And even when and honestly, in magical stories, it's almost something that the character needs to realize about themselves. Even though
Yeah.
you have all these distractions of magic wands and pixie dust, and then just kidding, all along it was inside of you.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really common theme in like, fantasy stories and stuff like that. So yeah.
So in a tragedy, do you think the character doesn't learn the thing they need to learn?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thus,
And that is the tragedy, is that they don't learn.
Too late.
what, Lydia?
Say again.
Or they don't learn it until it's too late, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was gonna say. Because look
Kind of like Hamlet, he learns his lesson, but he's like already dead.
Yeah, or Cyrano de Bergerac, right? He announces his love, but only on his deathbed, and then he finds out that she's loved him all along, and then it's too late. He's dying.
Yeah. It's just really fun to think about all this stuff and be like, ooh, what else can I think about? And then translate that into, your character work. I think the where the rubber meets the road for everybody is like using every little tool available to you, story structure, um, character arc, all of that, even plot points, like where are we in the story, to kind of like give you a little bit of an edge, because ultimately that's the whole point in auditioning, is to give you an edge that gives you something more specific. And also, here's what I guess as an acting coach, I would tell you, is that most people who don't get auditions, aside from the physical, whatever, because you can't control that, right? It's like you don't have the right color hair, or you're too skinny, or whatever. You didn't quite understand where this scene fit. We couldn't just lift the scene and put it into the movie without doing anything to it. And that's ultimately why I want you all to be thinking about all of this stuff, because I want the people who study with me to be the best people in town. I want you to be the people who get it, and are the best equipped for, translating that stuff into your auditions, so that you're booking these things and making scads of money and working all the time and having fun and doing what you moved out there to do, or where you live, wherever it is that you live, right? And really just going out there and being the best of the best. And that means thinking about a lot of different things. It doesn't ever mean reading your scene and deciding how you're going to say it, ever. It never, ever means that. Because you will almost certainly miss the mark, and if nothing else, you'll also just be doing what everybody else is doing. And so kind of coming in here and understand, like getting an idea of structure and getting an idea of where does my scene fit in the story, and my character's journey, yeses and nos. I think it's just all gravy, right? It's all gravy on the big, you know, on what we're trying to do. And it's the stuff that's just gonna add the little edge to what you're doing and make your stuff more specific, and honestly ultimately just be like, my universal axiom is that the dumbest person in the room is making the decision about whether you get the job. And that means that the dumbest person in the room has to understand what you did. And they have to be able to see the scene and go, oh, I get it. Because they're the inbred nephew of the executive who gave them the job. And it's really true though, Andres. It's like, ugh, you'd all lose heart.
It's interesting because a lot of times they'll just like, I just felt like this was the right, I don't know why, I just felt, but like you can, if you understand human, you can manipulate that to your advantage.
And you should.
Like I know exactly what kind of scene to write to make my husband laugh, to make him cry, to, because I know him very well, right? And I know what he's watched it. So you just like, oh, that person, blah, 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 and most people, like, I've been writing for 12 years, I barely understand structure. Like, I'm like, I think this is it. But like, the more you just like put time and effort into it, and it just becomes like second nature, and when you're watching something that doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll never go with somebody who doesn't feel right.
Yeah, you're not gonna get the job for, like, if you can't hack the audition. You'll either get a call back until you get the, if they really, really want you for whatever weird reason. Sometimes that's just because nobody that they called in was any good.
It's interesting. My sister writes and directs, and she's part of that organization. I was telling Lydia about it, Alliance of Women Directors. And I went to I'm like an ally member, and I went to their yearly party a couple of months ago. And I met a bunch of people, and they're like, it's really hard to get really good actors. They're like, I put out a breakdown for like their lab, right? So it's not like, it was not within the union rules, so people could submit to it. It wasn't paid, but like, these are really great projects to be a part of. They're like, I hated every audition I got because it was just all terrible. So, there's a lot of really terrible auditions being done.
I mean, and a lot of them put themselves on YouTube. So look up auditions on YouTube and see what you can see. There's nothing wrong with like going like, I don't like that. Because then you get to, I even did that yesterday. I was auditioning for Little Shop of Horrors, and I just was going to sing a song. And so I literally looked up like people who had auditioned for Little Shop of Horrors. Honestly, mostly because I just wanted to see what they did for their audition. I was just going to steal it. Not how they performed it, but like what clip they did or what song they did. And I found some auditions, and I was like, oh, that's cute. Like, oh, what a cute that's a cute amateur video. A couple of them did a really fine job. But go on there and see, what would you cast? Like, what are the auditions that you think work? There is an ineffable quality to a professional large market audition. You know, a well done Los Angeles or New York audition. There's just something a little different to it, and it's usually the comfortability of the actor. How much the actor is, you can see when an actor doesn't really care if they get the job, which is the way you always need to be, because those are the people we actually want to work with. It's like, I want to work with that guy because that other guy smelled of desperation. You know, anybody have any other questions for Erin? I'm talking too much.
Yeah, Erin, I have a question.
Sure.
What do you think the biggest mistake is that a writer could make before sending it in for a pitch or to be evaluated?
Feeling like you don't know what you're saying. Because this is one of the elements that we haven't yet talked about, but your voice is really important. Your perspective is really important. Sometimes things will be made that's just like, anybody could have written this, right? But that doesn't like sound like, you want it to be, this is the subject I'm tackling, and this is what I think about it. And then I would also say, like, and we haven't talked about this yet either, but like nailing your log line is so important. And there's like formulas to do it, but that also is like explaining exactly what you're saying. So here's this person, here's what they want, here's their like flaws and obstacles they'll have to face in pursuing it. Yeah.
That's your log line. That's your formula for log line.
Yeah. There's there's like one sentence, there's two sentences, there's like right. After blah 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 then, or if when blah 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 then when. But if you don't have your main character, what they want, what's going to prevent them from getting it, then there's no movie. Yeah. Also, my husband would say to make sure everything's spelled correctly, but I say you can have like a typo.
when I was an intern at Wendy Feinerman Productions, she did Forrest Gump, and I would read, of course, I did coverage on scripts that would come in. Generally they go interns first, you know, vice president of the company last. And I got a script one time that was like, it wasn't properly formatted. It didn't talk correctly in the action, and it had doodles in like all over it. But it had been Xeroxed that way and come from like UTA that way.
Oh my God.
And I was like, what is this? And I started to read it, and I'm like, badly formatted, blah, 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 blah. And I was basically just going to not even read it. I'm not sure if I ever did read it. But the vice president of the company was like, she's like, it's actually a really good script. You should read it. And I was like, oh, okay. So I guess it depends on who you're talking to. Formatting may or may not matter.
Yes, and everybody has a different opinion about it. But it would like I'm a no like buddy, right? Like I didn't grow up here. I didn't have any ins. Like so like no one knows me, right? And so like I have to follow the rules. And it's fine. I don't care. Whatever. If you know what I like having like a closed universe. Like I love the unities of time, place, and action because like you have to be so creative, right? And it feels nice, and I like when the story is a circle, like the people who started the problem are the people who have to fix it. There's no Deus Ex Machina. But if you are thinking about writing yourself, I would just say just buy Final Draft. Like learn the rules. Just like, just do it because it's really hard to get people to take you seriously if there's just like the basic things. Yeah. Like, because like those that violated all the rules. I was looking up because of Furiosa coming out. I was looking up Mad Max Fury Road script, and it has pictures from the graphic novel in it, and I was like, because I read really fast and I page through like really fast, and I'm like, this is gonna slow me down so much. I don't want to look at pictures. Just want to read the script.
The executives who are reading it who are only looking at the pictures.
They're like, I don't have to read. Amazing. Look, guys, I have worked at places before where they straight up lie on the phone to the writers. Oh, we read it. It was so great. And they'll like snap at me. I'll be like, it was like blank meets blank. And they'll be like, it was like this meets this thing. Like I'm like feeding them, and it's just how it's done. One of my friends.
I mean,
yeah, it's how they are. One of my friends, I'm literally leaving in like 20 minutes to drive AJ to play poker with this person tonight. He read one of my scripts as an agent, and he was like, yeah, I read it, but my sister's got much better notes than I have, so I'll just have him send them to you. I was like, yeah, because he read it and not you. You can be honest. I don't care. Known you for 20 years. So
what are you driving AJ to do?
Oh, he's going to play poker with his older friends tonight.
I would tell you to tell them to tell them hi from me, but of course they have no idea who I am.
But AJ does. AJ loves you.
But you can always AJ and give him a big old hug from me.
Oh gosh.
Well, if nobody else has anything, yeah, Lydia, sorry, not Linda.
Linda, wow, my heart.
Sorry, Lydia.
Real quick, no, that's okay, Stephen. I'm joking. Sort of. Erin, is there anything that you want to highlight for us in this Hallmark document as writers that we should be? I mean, not writers, actors that we should be aware of. I mean, I'm going to read this whole thing, but is there anything you want to highlight for us? Or you kind of already did?
I'm going to pick one right away, which is clear story, not too complex. People sometimes watch while doing something else. That's a clue as an actor. There's nothing too complicated,
Yeah, that's a good one. And there's a lot more in this document about like what they don't like. So I would read if you're going for TV movies, they want a very specific thing.
Is the 9-act structure only used for TV movies? What is it used for?
So I've only seen it for movies or TV movies. Yeah, to fit in, because like the first act's kind of long and then they progressively get a little bit shorter is because they hook their audience in the beginning and then they try to sell you shampoo. And then they get you for a little bit more and then they try to sell you toilet paper. And then they get you so like figuring out where that is. Yeah.
Are they doing that for miniseries now, or is that a totally different structure? Because miniseries are super popular.
For the Hallmark or like
not Hallmark.
So dramatic miniseries. I would say for dramatic ones, maybe look at the 5-act structure. Most of them would fit in that. And then comedy, which I don't really right. It follows a totally different. It's either a 2 or a 3 act structure. And there's different types of comedy. So like that's very complicated, and I am not as skilled in that as other people who spend their lives doing it. So yeah, whenever you get an audition, it's never a terrible thing to look up how they're actually like written or made, because that will help you.
Yeah. I mean, sitcom always follows basically the same structure, which is there's always an A and a B story. And the A story is you can completely cut the B story out of it, and the A story still follows its own plot. And it's always really just that week's dilemma and then solve it. That's really all it is. You know, with some jokes.
I always find the B story, and then sometimes if it's like a complex thing, they have a C story. So I get very lost in all of that. I'm just like, oh, I want to write the main story. I want to write about one person. That's why I switched to features.
Well, there was a show several years ago that a friend of mine was on, and it was called, I think it was called The Rerun Show, and it took old sitcom scripts from the 80s, just completely excised the B plot and reshot with, they built the set over again, reshot the A plot with all of the actors that were on the show playing the characters from the original show, and then changing the meaning of every single line to have some sort of innuendo or be something completely different. And it was then that I realized, oh, yeah, there's like an A and a B, and all you got to do is cut the B, and your sitcom episode is like 14 minutes long, and completely functions entirely without the B plot. It just functions completely without it. You totally don't even have to have it. And actually, a lot of shows, most shows probably do A and B. I don't know, Erin, if you have dealt much with drama, but like I think about Star Trek, the like the Next Generation, the 80s iteration of that always had an A and a B plot. And especially in the first season or two, they were forcing B plot and A plot together, and they never had anything to do with one another. And it was like you'd have like a situation where the ship was, there was something goes wrong on the holodeck or something, while at the same time they have to go handle a diplomatic mission with another ship. But those two things were so independent of each other. It was like, why did you do this? It was because they didn't know what they were doing, and they were using a lot of recycled scripts from a series that never happened in the 70s. And so they were kind of trying to force all this stuff. And, so even those shows have A and B, movies don't really have B plots, do they, too much?
Sometimes they do. A lot of comedies do. But
horror movies, and especially horror comedy.
That makes sense. Yeah. I do hate when it doesn't tie. It's like the Chekhov's gun. Why is it here unless it ties into what's happening and somehow like helps resolve whatever is at issue?
It's like the what?
The Chekhov's gun. Like if it's on stage, it has to fire.
The Doll's House.
The Chekhov gun.
Wait,
I've never heard
so
this.
there's in Chekhov's writing, it's a famous theater thing. If there's a gun on stage, on film, you better use it. You better not have a gun for no reason.
Oh.
And you can apply that to different.
Bye. So good to see you. Merry Christmas. Yeah, I don't I listen, I don't know everything. Like I said, I don't know what the checkout gun is. I'm gonna look that up and learn a little bit more about it.
I think it's Hedda Gobbler, right? That's from.
I learned about it in my screenwriting critique group, so I don't actually know what it's from, and I have never read Chekhov.
Chekhov puts it in a lot of stuff. There's a gun in The Seagull. There's a gun in Hedda Gabler. There's a gun in Cherry Orchard. I think he liked putting in a gun and using it.
I was going to say that I feel like the love story in films is often a B plot or a B story. Kind of ties into the A plot a lot of the time, but usually kind of runs independent of the adventure.
Yeah, that's true. Comedy is a lot. Yeah. Like the supporting character's love story, yeah.
Very fun. Anybody else? I'll let you go because I know Erin's also got to run. But this was so much fun. Thank you so much, Erin.
Sure.
Thank you, Erin. That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin.
If you hear things that are contradictory, if you don't like some of the stuff, I know 0.0002% of what's out there. So take it all with a grain of salt and use what works for you and go out and find what else works for you. So yeah, but always happy to chat with you guys. It was really nice to see you all.
And,
and thanks, Stephen, for putting it together.
Yeah, we'll do more of these as well. I was getting little ideas for other things to do as well. So we'll see you all on the flip side. If I don't see you, have a wonderful holiday, and hopefully see you in the new year.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
You again.
Bye, guys.